Next Sunday is the last Sunday after Epiphany. Now that may not seem important to you, but what that means is that a week from this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, which means we're in Lent. For those of us who've been planning activities and liturgy and all of those sorts of things, we've been in Lent a long time. Way too long a time. But here we are, we're right on the threshold of this new season of the church year. Season after the Epiphany this year has been very long. Last year, Easter came much earlier, so it was a shorter season. And this year we've had the wonderful benefit in this longer season after the Epiphany of each week for our gospel, reading from the Sermon on the Mount. And today is the last Sunday that we will do this. Next week we skip out of this part of the gospel and go many chapters ahead as we prepare for Lent. It's really great. The Sermon on the Mount is some of the most famous verses in the Scriptures, in the Gospels especially. They're beautiful. You know, the blessed R's, what we often refer to at times as the Beatitudes. Then a whole host of other things. Great and wondrous beauty, but they are impossible to do. That's their nature. And then at the end of today's gospel, Jesus says to us, be perfect, even as your Father was in perfect. Well, I'm ready to give up. What's the use? But it's all in how we see things, isn't it? So let me ask you this question. How do you see life? How do you understand what life is? What thoughts come to mind? What feelings come to mind as you think about living life? I ask you this because when you get up in the mornings, your image and view of life will inform how you anticipate your day. If your image of life is that it is wonderful and great, then you will probably have more energy and excitement about meeting your day. If your image is, oh no, here it comes again, then you know what your day is going to be like. What is your image of life? I ask you that because I think that our image of life gets woven into today's gospel. And I think that Jesus, as he approaches his disciples and teaches them in this part of the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about their image and thoughts about life. He starts out by saying, you have always been oriented to the law and the fairness of the law. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Lex talionis is what it's called. And that's that basic aspect of the law that says, if you poke out my eye, I can poke out your eye. Now that may seem harsh, but it's much better than if you poke out my eye, I get to cut off your head. There is a fairness there that goes with it. He says, you have been oriented to life in this way, but I have come to change how you see life. How you see life. Now, I can look back over my own life and I can see various stages where I would see life in different ways. As a very young child, I thought life was wonderful. It was great. There was nothing bad in the world except for the little girl down the street, and that's because she was a little girl. Wasn't anything she did. It wasn't anything else. It was the nature of her being. She was a girl. And then there came a point in my life where everything was oriented against me. It didn't matter what was going on. I was a victim. Want to guess when that was? In and around the teenage years. And I would get up in the morning defensive. So defensive I was offensive. Because that's how I saw life. But Jesus invites us into seeing this differently. So differently, in fact, that he says to us that we must pray for our enemies. That's a complete shift in how they understood life. Pray for your enemies. As I began to think about this week, I thought, I don't really have any enemies. There may be others who say they are. But I don't really have any enemies. And I began to read some of the commentaries from various people about what they were thinking about these scriptures. And they were saying, I don't have any enemies. I don't have any enemies. So I was driving down the road and I was thinking about how I didn't have any enemies, and someone cut me off. I was not very friendly in my language and my thoughts about them. So I went home and I sat down and I turned on the television to watch the evening news. Some of those thoughts and words were resurrected as I did that. And I thought, maybe it's not about that I have someone that I feel is out to shoot me or kill me, but maybe it has to do with how I see and treat other people. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit to you that when you tell me that I need to pray for those folks, my enemies, whoever they are, I'm not sure I want to do that. In fact, I will tell you that I do not want to pray for them. Leave them to their own devices. Let God deal with them. Because I'm certain that the way God will deal with them will not be good. Because I know how they should be. But if I allow myself to pray for them, then something happens. And maybe that's why I don't want to pray for my enemies. First, if I pray for them, then I've got to admit that they're human. I have my doubts. But I have to admit that they're human. And the second thing that I have to do is I have to admit that in Paul's words today, they are temples of God. Is that easy for you to do? It's not for me. But if I pray for them, I have to open myself to those possibilities. But here, this is the clincher. if I pray for them, I have to acknowledge that maybe God is going to change something in prayer. One of the things I've learned over years, there's this little phrase that folks like to use, prayer changes things. I don't believe it. I'll tell you up front. I don't think prayer changes things. I think prayer changes people. And my hope when I pray for someone, when I pray for an enemy or someone toward whom I am not very friendly, my hope that when I pray for them is that God is going to make them perfect, even as I think they ought to be. But if I pray for them openly and honestly, there is the distinct possibility that God is going to change them in some way that I am not looking for. But I think there's a greater danger in my prayers. Whenever I pray, whenever I truly and honestly pray, God changes me. And you know, that's probably why I don't want to pray for them. Because it might actually be that when God's through with me, if God is ever through with me, that I might actually look a lot more like them than they look like me. And perhaps that's what it means to be perfect, as God our Father is perfect. Not that we are at any point finished, but that we are always open to the changing nature of God's redeeming love. There it is. There it is. God forbid if God changes me, because if God changes me, it affects how I see life, how I see God, and how I see myself. And you know what? It's exactly what I need. So thank God. Thank God that despite what I pray for somebody else, God will change me into something more fulfilling for His kingdom and make alive in me anew His never-ending love. Pray for your enemies. Amen.